As the day dawned on the most contested and controversial conference of the governing ANC, the importance was not lost on the 5,000 delegates attending. This is clearly seen as the most decisive conference in the history of the 106-year-old party.
This is one ANC. If ever any one of the two front-runners does not emerge, we are still going to support whoever emerges after this conference.
This is an organization accused of having abandoned the high moral ground of its former leaders. The ANC has been plagued by infighting, which has spilled over into violence, which has worsened as the race towards the election of a new president for the party took off. In KwaZulu-Natal, it resulted in the death of an ANC youth leader, Stem Shlongo. In the Eastern Cape, 9 people were injured in what Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa called a festival of chairs. Leadership disputes have ended up in court in 3 of the 9 provinces, KwaZulu-Natal, the Free State and the Northwest. By the opening of the conference, there were 7 candidates vying for the top job. Cyril Ramaphosa, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, Jeff Radebe, Lindiwe Sisulu, BALEKA MBETE and Zweli Mkhize. 2 clear frontrunners soon emerged, Ramaphosa and Dlamini-Zuma, and most of the disputes emanated from their supporters. When the final allocation of branch delegates was announced in October, it was clear that this would not be an easy conference to predict, as the ANC decided to allow branches to choose their own delegates, and that they would not be bound by their respective provincial executive councils. When nomination closed, indications were that Mr. Ramaphosa's biggest support came from the urban areas, while Dr. Dlamini-Zuma's support came from rural areas, and this was going to be a very close race. Although cautious at first, Mr. Ramaphosa came out strongly towards the end of the election campaign on patronage, state capture and the influence of the Gupta family. Dr. Dlamini-Zuma did not respond to allegations of state capture and instead focused on radical economic transformation. This made for a tense first few days at the start of the conference. The supporters of the 2 main contenders separated themselves in 2 sections of the conference floor and had a sing-off when the conference opened. When it came to greet the former leaders of the ANC, their welcome was unanimous, and for the interdenominational faith prayers, they were, for the moment, singing from the same hymn. Africa,
Our stories.
How do I begin?
Our lives. When all seems to fail, we will raise our voices a bit louder for our justice.
Well, I went into absolute shock. My whole body was shaky. I couldn't hold a phone, but there he was. I couldn't believe the nonchalant that they were still in the area 2 weeks later.
And in times when the justice system is not able to help us with our individual battles,
I'm willing to do anything. What are you doing? Nothing. Feeling sorry for yourself? No, it's not an option.
These are our stories on Cutting Edge Channel 404.
We pump up your energy, keeping you in action through sports updates while resting at home. This is what's happening in your world of sports every weekend.
In the second half, Kolisi and Jaco Kriel combined well, and Kolisi scored his second try. He was also named man of the match.
Confusion from the West defenders gifted Doccie with a close-range goal.
I'll see that you touch the penalty. It's 1-0. Cato City.
In the 10th round, he pinned a visibly fatigued McGregor on the ropes and hammered the Irishman before the referee stepped in to stop the bout.
He's a tough competitor.
He's a lot more experienced, especially in the later
Keep it locked on Sports Live every Saturday and Sunday at 20:30.
Participant with vested interests rather than an impartial and fair observer on ANC organizational matters. Agreed?
President Zuma portrayed the media as an active participant with vested interests. The courts were also not spared.
Judgments that give an impression that we can disregard the Constitution for political expediency or to solve what we regard as current problems set a dangerous precedent which will make it difficult to govern in future or to make ordinary citizens to abide by the Constitution.
And then there was the elephant in the room, corruption and state capture. Here he pointed a finger at the private sector.
Theft and corruption in the private sector is as bad as that in government and must be dealt with decisively by law enforcement agencies. Corporate collusion is now a criminal offense, punishable with 10 years in prison in terms of a new provision signed last year.
He said corruption in the private sector was treated with kid gloves and is referred to in softer terms such as accounting irregularities or lapses in corporate governance. He added that state capture will be probed in a judicial commission of inquiry to uncover the truth. The only praise President Zuma had was for the Youth and Women's League. He ended his speech in the same way he has rallied his supporters in the past, with a song.
Amandla awethu matla yarona all power ohinde lendlela esihambayo.
President Zuma has not been credited for a number of successes. One, turning around the police on HIV/AIDS. If you listen to Minister of Health, he'll tell you that the South Africans now live longer because of that policy change. The introduction of Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation it's a good innovation, precisely because first there are a number of things that it does. One is to make sure that the ANC does not have a horizon of only 5 years.
And then it was time for the large media contingent of a few hundred reporters, including many overseas media houses, to wait while the process of trying to verify whether delegates' credentials could be accepted got underway. Behind the scenes, the disputes that surfaced in the months leading up to the conference were dealt with. And in the midst of this, late on Saturday evening, ANC Chairperson BALEKA MBETE announced that she would be endorsing Ramaphosa as president. Also significant was when another presidential candidate, Lindiwe Sisulu, agreed to work as a team with Ramaphosa for the top two positions in the ANC. The number of delegates which were eligible to vote stood at 4,776 by early afternoon on Sunday. By midday, ANC Deputy Secretary-General JESSIE DUARTE emerged, confirming that the credential process had been finalized.
It's not unusual to delay credentials. We do it for the credibility of the process so that, as you well know, this is the one point that people use to have court interdicts and court cases and injunctions, and we've been extremely careful not to open any possibility that would take us in that direction. So, number one, stay true to the branch-mandated delegate, and that's what we wanted to prove, and we have. to 90% of the case. The other percentage, of course, is what the courts did to compel us to remove branch delegates. And we're living with that. And I can say to you that the credentials have been adopted.
By late afternoon, the media was allowed back into the plenary session. It was clear that although the ANC has managed to pull off the process of verifying delegates, the divisions still existed. By late afternoon, the media was allowed back into the plenary session, and it was clear that although the ANC has managed to pull off the process of verifying delegates, the divisions still existed, and they made their voices loud and clear on the process that needed to be followed in voting for the leaders and National Executive Council. The bone of contention was whether delegates would be allowed to take in lists to the voting booth. BALEKA and MBETE explained that the days of slates in the ANC are in the past.
We are not forcing the issue relating to lists. Okay, comrades? So, sicela nehlisa umoya asilwi ngendaba yama lists.
The Dlamini Zuma camp did not agree.
Comrades,
we are not agreeing that comrades must go and vote according to what you are saying. Branches has been delegated here. They must vote according to the mandate of their branches. And they must have, because you can't go and vote without, you can't remember the 80 names. So branches must be given an opportunity to vote according to what they want.
The decision that delegates have to identify themselves to the Electoral Commission with their accreditation cards and another form of ID led to more protests. When ANC Secretary-General GWEDE MANTASHE tried to rally the delegates with an ANC cry, well, by then one delegate was fast asleep on the floor, the response was lukewarm.
To protect us from ourselves.
When it became clear that the squabbling in front of the media was not going to resolve soon, this suggestion by Naledi Pandor was accepted.
Chair, we cannot allow the conference to continue in this manner. Well, we cannot allow conference to go on in this manner. I suggest, Chairperson, we accept the proposal that we proceed with the top 6 nominations and we deal with the issue of the 80 and whether you can have a list at that point. We cannot carry on in this way.
The final list of nominations resulted in a 2-horse race between the two front-runners, Cyril Ramaphosa and Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma.
As things stand, comrades, we have 2 candidates for the position of president, Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa and Comrade Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma.
This was after ANC Treasurer General Zweli Mkhize surprised the conference by announcing that he would withdraw from the race.
I want to acknowledge all the nominations and all the work that the comrades have done, but I also want to say I've been engaged with a number of comrades here and would like to contribute in building and strengthening unity in this organization. So at that level, I'd like to withdraw from the nomination. Thank you very much, comrades.
Lindiwe Sisulu, who decided to throw her weight behind Ramaphosa, was up against Mpumalanga Premier David Mabuza for the role of Deputy President.
For the position of Deputy President, we have got Comrade David Mabuza and Comrade Lindiwe Sisulu.
And then it was up to the election office to explain how the voting would take place.
And we will provide you with one ballot form with the 6 positions on the ballot form. We are requesting you to make your mark against the candidate of your choice per position. Once you have done that, we will request you please to fold your ballot form and place it in the ballot box.
Initially, word from the conference chamber was that voting will only be taking place the next morning. But the conference delegates decided to overrule this decision by the Electoral Commission and started voting late in the night. This was stopped in the early hours of the morning and restarted early on Monday morning. Voting continued for the rest of the day and people were led in groups of 200. Speaking to the media for the last time as Secretary General, GWEDE MANTASHE acknowledged that there were dirty tricks during campaigning for the next party's leadership.
That we're working for regaining the lost ground. As we saw in the local government elections, we want to regain that. We don't want to be relegated into a rural party. We want to regain the metros and want to be a strong ANC. So anybody who asks the question, whether 2019 you have doubts or not, we can't have doubts about 2019. We must work hard to win them well and increase our support, improve from where we were in the 2016 elections.
On Monday afternoon, it was announced that the counting of the 4,700 votes had started. This came amid rumors that there had been arrests for voting irregularities. Amid this, President Jacob Zuma did a walkabout at Nasrec. Back in the plenary, fraternal organizations gave messages of support. Significant was the message by the Secretary General of the South African Communist Party, Bladen Zamande, who in the past month has become very critical of the ANC, in particular of President Jacob Zuma.
That we must not deny the challenges that are facing us as a country and as a movement. We want to say as the South African Communist Party, it's not automatic that after every 20 years, liberation movements in power begin to falter. We must look at the reasons why. It's not automatic. Yes, we know that there are always regime change agendas. Every revolution, by the way, breeds a counter-revolution at all times. But we must also be looking at ourselves and saying, are we not making mistakes that will be used by our enemies in order to effect a regime change agenda?
As everybody eagerly awaited the announcement of the election results in a sweltering hall, there were delays because of a recount, and finally the results came in.
And the distribution of votes is as follows. Comrade Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma received 2261 votes, and Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa received 2440 votes. We declare Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa as the new president of the African National Congress. David Mabuza is the new Deputy President of the African National Congress.
Mpumalanga Premier David Mabuza's strategy not to align himself to any of the presidential candidates and to promote unity had paid off. The announcements were a roller coaster ride as a mix of candidates from the two opposing camps in the ANC were elected. GWEDE MANTASHE became the ANC chairperson. The rest of the positions were a clear indication that slates are a thing of the past. Ace Magashule was elected as Secretary General and his deputy is JESSIE DUARTE. Both are supporters of the Zuma camp. The only other leader from the Ramaphosa camp was Paul Mashatile, who has been very outspoken against President Zuma. He will be controlling the purse strings of the ANC as Treasurer General. It was clear that the delegates wanted unity, and the ANC has indeed achieved that by balancing the NEC. Analysts, however, feel that it would restrict Ramaphosa's ability to bring about extensive reform. The delegates woke up the second last day of the conference with a new leader, but the voting for the remainder of the NEC still needed to take place. It was delayed amid reports that 68 voting papers that have been rejected were being discussed by the leadership of the ANC. It was related to the narrow victory of 27 votes of Ace Magashule over Senzo Mqunu. The lack of women in senior positions of the NEC was surprising, given the stated commitment of leaders in the campaign. At a news conference, the Women's League said they were troubled by the dominance of men.
In the 105 years of the ANC as an organization and a leader of society, we feel the ANC has failed the women of South Africa. The ANC believes strongly in non-sexism, and therefore this is a principle that was put into action by President Oliver Tambo, who we are celebrating this year. President Oliver Tambo formed a commission on the emancipation of women, and he served in that committee, but also he ensured that women were represented in decision-making bodies, and also he had a confidence in women. Now, we have to express our disappointment as members of the ANC, because we are members of the ANC before we are members of the ANC Women's League.
At midday, Mr. Ramaphosa went for a walkabout around Nasrec. He was keen to point out that all was well.
Our conference is going so well. Many doomsayers had said that this conference was going to collapse. This conference was not going to go on, and we've proven once again, maybe for the millionth time in our 105 years history of existence, that the ANC is able to rise even above its own strength. And here we were able to demonstrate that the ANC family, this great organization of our people, wants to emerge out of this conference united, renewed, and stronger than it was when we came to conference. We've now elected the top 6 leadership of the organization, and all of us are humbled, deeply humbled to have been invested with this confidence by the delegates of our movement who are attending the conference, who are representing the nearly 1 million members of the ANC who are rooted in the communities where our people live. So the 6 of us are really humbled to have been given this opportunity to serve our people. And we will serve our people with great distinction, with humility, and we will keep to the task that we've been given.
The ANC has managed to keep a lid on the boiling pot of factions within its ranks at Nasrec. This is despite the fact that the 68 missing votes were still a bone of contention. The affected delegates were from Limpopo. It led to another delay at the proceedings as the two factions in the ANC argued about the votes, which were said to be about Ace Magashule. The ANC announced that it will decide about the votes at its closed plenary session. The status of the conference was under threat amid fears of a court challenge.
I think what members of the ANC and leaders of the ANC must not do, when, for example, we don't do things in terms of the constitution, and then people go to court, and court direct us to do things that we're supposed to do, like executive function, whether we are public official or public representatives, we must not blame judges for that. Because they are the guardians of the constitution. They are helping us to do things that we are unable to do as directed by our own constitution. For example, if we don't do things in terms of the ANC constitution, others decide to go to court, and courts direct us as the ANC. We can't blame the courts.
The treatment of the media at the conference also came under the spotlight. Despite this, Zizi Kotwa insisted that the relationship should be of mutual respect. A Bloomberg journalist was manhandled by security and his accreditation was taken away.
I'm not threatening you. What are you doing?
After a Twitter storm, it was returned to him and the ANC apologized for the incident. During this conference, the ANC had erected a fence to ensure that journalists can't access delegates. This is in sharp contrast to the openness that the ANC displayed in conferences that took place in earlier years. Markets reacted favorably to Mr. Ramaphosa's win, with the rand strengthening to the dollar on Monday. It later weakened, and experts say it's because of the election of Ace Magashule as Secretary General.
We've already seen that many of the international markets have responded fairly positively. I must give a disclaimer, but I don't think that should be our entire litmus test for our own economic efficacy and our sovereign economic policy. But it is an important, bellwether, and the rand appreciated somewhat. The other thing, though, that's quite important to appreciate is that the markets and the international community are waiting to see what next. And I've been talking about the American talk about the first 100 days, and I think the first 100 hours for Mr. Ramaphosa are extremely important.
The ANC support has dropped from just under 70% in 2004 to 54% in last year's municipal elections. It lost 3 key metropolitan areas in 2016. It was clear that delegates were aware of the effect that the divisions in the ANC would have on its popularity in the 2019 elections. Most analysts agreed that the ANC had a better chance of remaining the dominant force in South Africa, with Cyril Ramaphosa at its helm.
They now have a president who has the ability, I think, to hold these two sides together. In fact, if I understand what has happened in the last few days, essentially a deal has been done by Ramaphosa and his people with the nationalists, the populists from the so-called Premier League provinces. The question is, can that deal be of service to a new president in holding the organization together, or will it simply get in the way of him making the big decisions that he needs to take to move the country forward?
It's going to be difficult for Cyril Ramaphosa. He's inheriting a stalemate, but it is important for him to drive a renewal program, especially if his eyes are at election support, because the ANC has been losing support in the past few elections.
Former Gauteng Premier Doccie said it is going to be difficult to reconcile the different parties in the ANC.
Look corruption in the eye. That one is not a bygone. That's the focus, because it's about the budget of the people on health, education, housing, and so on. So it's got to be done the way it's got to be done. We congratulate all of them, but stand up, be steadfast, show leadership, because leadership is not about negotiations. You can negotiations. Finally, you can use that process, but it's about decisive, resolute decisions to correct wrongs within the ANC, and then, of course, society can accept it.
He says Mr. Ramaphosa needs to be tough on corruption.
The president, Comrade Cyril, knows where the danger is. It all starts with gossips in little corners. People believe these things, and then you spread these things. There's funny intelligence reports. It starts there. From there, the rest is true. Because the corrupt people must first corrupt the ANC. Before you get your hands onto ESCOM, Telkom, SAA, before you steal in the president's office, as has happened, before you steal as a minister, before you become a thief as a premier, as an MEC, as a councillor, and so on. You've got to corrupt the processes of the ANC so that you open up the road. Now, that's where they should focus to make sure that these acts of corruption, this thing of turning public purses into private funds, must come to an end.
Experts say that the country is watching to see whether the ANC is capable of reconciling its factions.
The general population in South Africa got used to the fact that the ANC has a lot of factions. And each time they go to a provincial, a regional, or a national conference, a particular slate or a particular faction will make it. And now we're all taken by surprise that people from the different factions have actually made it to the NEC. And that's why we get worried. And I think now it is time to say not a single faction has made it, but the ANC has actually won. But I think it's also very, very important when you look at the entire NEC. You have got David Mabuza, who is the former, who is coming from Mpumalanga. You have got Ace Magashule from the Free State, Paul Mashatile from Gauteng. These three were all premiers, and they were all chairpersons of the province. What does that mean? You bringing in the NEC very influential people that had a vast influence in their different provinces, and they must actually bring their different experiences in the National Executive Committee. What we'll then need is that they must all forget where they're coming from, and they actually focus on what is best for the ruling party.
If Ramaphosa builds a very strong presidency and drives a strong cleanup campaign, he just might be able to rescue the spiral, the downward spiral in electoral support for the ANC. And he might be just the guy they need to rebuild a strong party that can put up a strong election. But the days of a dominant party system are gone. He is going to be managing a simple majority or even a coalition government.
The representation of the factions within the National Executive Committee. If you have the other camp being heavily represented, he's going to have a problem. He already has a challenge with the top six, because some of the three people who are in the top six are the supporters of Ojekwa Zuma. But he's a master negotiator, so he should be able to manage and negotiate the different tensions. And I also think the tensions themselves that would make it more creative. Already you see business writing to him.
The delegates locked themselves behind closed doors to report back on policy documents on a range of issues, include land, economic transformation, education, and the battle of ideas. It was during this discussion on the expropriation of land that reports filtered out that the debate had become heated and some delegates were shoved around. This was denied by Zizi Kodwa.
I'm looking for somebody who is not here, who tweeted something that is mischievous and a complete distortion, complete false. There's a person called Kanita. I'm looking for her. She tweeted that there was a physical blows inside. GWEDE MANTASHE, the national chair, had to call the security. There was no security, which was called by a person called GWEDE MANTASHE, who's now a national chairperson of the ANC. We find that being unfortunate.
The chairperson of the Economic Transformation Committee, ENOCH GODONGWANA, announced that the conference has decided that the ANC will make room for land expropriation without compensation. He said the decision was driven by the anger of ordinary South Africans at the slow pace of transformation.
The National Executive Committee will initiate and will initiate some amendments in the Constitution in Section 25 in order to achieve expropriation without compensation. That's the first part of the resolution. But there's a caveat. For that to happen, for expropriation without compensation to happen, it must be sustainable. What are the conditions for sustainability? Among those that have been narrated is that it must not impact on agricultural production, food security, and impact on other sectors of the economy. That's generally the trust we've agreed on that, but the conditions is that it must not impact, it must be sustainable, not impact on food production, food security, and on other sectors.
To amend the Constitution to allow for land expropriation, a two-thirds majority would be needed in Parliament. The economic freedom fighters have indicated in the past that they would support this. The decisions were rubber-stamped by delegates at the conference. Another major policy decision is the decriminalisation of sex work. The closed session dragged on into the night with the disputed votes leading to speculation that court cases may again be the way that the ANC resolves its problems. But there was finally a way forward.
Out there were these 63 votes or delegates. But out of the 63, only 16 were found to be valid. And those delegates participated in the voting, and their results will be counted. And they have also voted in the second round. So we are just clarifying this matter so that there is no confusion out there.
Magashule also announced that the ANC is going to downgrade its Israeli office. He emphasized that Nasrec has not only united the ANC, it has strengthened it.
We emerge from the 54th National Conference more united and determined to lead the struggle for a united, non-racial, non-sexist, democratic, and prosperous South Africa.
Then it was time for the first address by the ANC's new president.
They are not singing and singing. They're one side and one side. Amandla! Amandla! Viva ANC, viva! Viva ANC, viva! In the months and weeks before this conference, speculation was rife that the 54th conference of the ANC would either not take place or would collapse on the very first day. Your attendance here as delegates, representing your branches, is a victory over the doomsayers and those who do not wish our movement well. We therefore have to congratulate you for having defied the negative speculative predictions by making this conference a successful conference, because it has been a successful conference. There were some who even suggested that Nasrec in 2017 would represent the end of the ANC, and the ANC would rise here divided and fractured. the ANC is still here. We are still here, standing 106 years later. We are alive, we are leading, and we are here to stay. NASREC has not only united us, it has also strengthened us. It has galvanized us and has also rejuvenated us, and we continue to surprise and confound our critics.
Referring to the negative campaigns of the presidential election race, Ramaphosa said this was rejected by the conference.
As delegates representing branches of our movement, you as the delegates have given expression to our people's hopes through the resolutions that you have adopted here and the leadership that you have chosen. In electing the leadership, you as the delegates have done something really special. You have turned your backs on the politics of the slate. You have insisted that the people who lead this movement should not be from one or another faction, but should serve our people in their own right through recognizing their capability so that they can take this movement forward.
He promised to repair relations with the alliance and vowed to deal with state-owned enterprises which have been linked to state capture.
And we have also we are aware that leadership in our movement, difficult matters in the state, and we have had to confront the critical issues that we have been having to deal with regard to critical institutions of our state that were targeted by individuals and other people through the exercise of influence and manipulation of governance processes. This has led to the weakening of our state-owned enterprises whose governance and structures need to be revamped. And we are going
The new ANC president came out strongly against corruption. Without directly mentioning Steinhoff, he said corruption in the public and private sector should be acted upon.
Given all these challenges, we are called upon to act against corruption. As our declaration says, we are also called upon to act against collusion and other economic crimes prevalent in both the public sector as well as the private sector. We are also called upon to investigate without any fear or favor the so-called accounting irregularities that cause turmoil in the markets and wipe out billions and billions of rands from ordinary South Africans. Now, this conference has resolved that this must be acted upon and it must come to a stop. Corruption has to be brought to a stop, and it must happen with immediate effect. We must also act fearlessly against alleged corruption and abuse of office within our own ranks.
The new ANC president closed the conference on a conciliatory tone.
We cannot close this 54th conference without paying tribute to you for your contribution over many decades to the struggle for freedom,
democracy and development. The service that you have rendered to our movement is given more meaning by this song, ukuthi ANC iyasebenzela. You did precisely that. You worked for the ANC, and we thank you for that. Ngoba ekusempeleni uyisebenzela i-ANC, siyakubonga Nqamalala umsebenzi wakho owenzile. As we close this conference, we close it thanking you, but we also close it saying to all the delegates of our country, a great foundation has been laid by our leaders in the past so that we can move forward. The leadership that you have elected today is meant to follow on the foundation that has been laid from our great leaders that have preceded all the other leaders. And so therefore, comrades, we thank you, and we thank you for your attendance at this conference. I'm able now to say this has indeed been a successful conference of the African National Congress, and we therefore close this conference knowing that we have done a great job. I-ANC yasebenzelwa, yasebenze, ANC yasebenzelwa, la yasebenze, halala, hala, yasebenze, halala, hala, mandla.